She was just a nurse manager. He was the CEO who saw her as a disposable cog in his machine. But when a critically injured VIP arrived and she spoke a single coded phrase, the Pentagon Liaison's head snapped around, and the CEO's world began to unravel. Now let me take you inside St. Jude's General on the day everything changed. The smell hit her first. Not the familiar, layered scent of the emergency department, the sharp tang of antiseptic, the metallic hint of blood, the faint, sad perfume of wilting flowers by the nurse's station. This was different. It was the smell of money. Specifically, the crisp, sterile scent of Alistair Finch's cologne, a fragrance that cost more per ounce than a junior nurse made in an hour. It was an olfactory assault, an announcement of his presence that arrived seconds before he did. Anya Sharma, head nurse of the ED, didn't look up from her tablet. Her focus was on the staffing roster for the next 72 hours. A nasty flu was working its way through the city, and they were already running at 130% capacity. She was trying to juggle shifts, begging people to take overtime, trying to plug the holes in a dam that was threatening to burst. "Nurse Sharma." The voice was smooth as expensive whiskey, but carried an undertone of condescension that always set her teeth on edge. She deliberately finished inputting a shift change before looking up. Alistair Finch stood before her desk, a small island of administrative calm in the controlled chaos of the ER. He was a man assembled from a catalog for powerful men. The suit was Italian, tailored so precisely it looked molded to his lean frame. The watch on his wrist was a sliver of Swiss engineering that could fund her department's supply budget for a month. The smile on his face was practiced, political, and utterly devoid of warmth. He smiled like a man of God about to ask for a very large donation. Behind him hovered two members of the hospital's board, their expressions a mixture of sycophantic agreement and mild discomfort at being in the trenches of the emergency room. "Mr. Finch," Anya acknowledged. Her voice was level, professional, a mask she had perfected over years of dealing with men like him. "I was just giving Mr. Albright and Mrs. Chen a tour," Finch said, gesturing vaguely at the bustling department, "showing them our frontline operations, and I happened to be reviewing the preliminary budget reports for the quarter." Anya's shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. She knew where this was going. He held up his own tablet, the screen glowing with spreadsheets and red numbers. "Your department's overtime is, to put it mildly, astronomical. It's bleeding the hospital dry." The accusation hung in the air, loud and obscene in the relative quiet of the administrative nook. A few nurses nearby slowed their pace, their ears perked. The quiet hum of monitors and the distant cough of a patient seemed to fade. "We're in the middle of a citywide influenza outbreak, Mr. Finch," Anya stated, keeping her eyes on his. "And our patient intake is up 40%. We are understaffed for a normal Tuesday, let alone a public health crisis. The overtime is a direct result of those conditions." Finch gave a small, dismissive laugh. It was a terrible sound. "Excuses, Nurse Sharma. A capable manager finds efficiencies. They innovate. They don't simply throw money at a problem. It suggests a certain lack of imagination." Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at the back of her neck. He was doing this on purpose. Here, in the heart of her department, in front of her people. It was a power play, a public dressing down to remind everyone who was in charge. "My team is working 18-hour shifts to keep people alive," Anya said, her voice dropping a fraction, gaining a hard, dense quality. "My imagination is focused on patient outcomes, not profit margins." The smile on Finch's face tightened. He had not expected a direct challenge. He took a step closer, lowering his own voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more threatening than a shout. "Your job is to manage this department within the budget I set. Your priorities are what I say they are. Your work has been adequate, but uninspired, and I am rapidly losing patience." He straightened up, his public voice returning. He addressed the board members, but his words were aimed squarely at her, each one a polished stone thrown at her authority. The truth is, in any large organization, some parts are more vital than others. But most are, when you get down to it, fundamentally interchangeable. He finally turned his gaze back to her, his eyes cold and flat. "Everyone is replaceable, Nurse Sharma. Especially managers who can't control their budget. Do you understand me?" It was a termination notice, wrapped in the language of corporate management, a threat she was meant to take home and sweat over. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. She could feel the eyes of her staff on her back. They looked at her with pity, with fear for their own jobs, with anger on her behalf. She was their leader, their shield against the hospital's bureaucracy, and he was shattering that shield in front of them. She felt utterly, profoundly alone. Anya took a slow, deliberate breath, the air tasting of his cologne and her own fury. She held his gaze. She would not let him see her break. "Understood, Mr. Finch." The two words were clipped, devoid of emotion, an admission of defeat she did not feel, but a necessary act of professional survival. He gave a satisfied nod, the victor of a battle only he had wanted to fight. "Good. I'm glad we had this chat." He turned and glided away, his entourage trailing in his wake like pilot fish. The scent of his cologne lingered, a foul miasma in the clean air of the ward. Anya stood motionless for a long moment, the tablet in her hand feeling impossibly heavy. She was not a hero, not a witness. She was just a target, and she was replaceable. Then the overhead speaker crackled to life, a sharp burst of static, and a voice, tight with urgency, cut through the air. "Code Black, air ambulance inbound, ETA 4 minutes, multiple GSW, blast trauma, repeat, Code Black." Anya's head snapped up. The world shifted. There was no more time for Alistair Finch. There was no more time for humiliation, or budgets, or the biting sting of injustice. The carefully constructed cage of her own paranoia fell away. There was only the code. Code Black. Mass casualty protocol, but used here for a single, overwhelmingly critical patient who would require the resources of an entire team, possibly multiple teams. It was the hospital's equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. Anya moved. She didn't think, she reacted. "Trauma Bay 1, now!" she yelled, her voice a clarion call that cut through the entire ER. "Davis, I want you on airway. Chen, vascular access. Get 2 large-bore IVs ready. Miller, get the rapid infuser and 4 units of O-neg from the cooler. Now! Move!" The sluggish, morale-drained atmosphere of moments before evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, focused adrenaline. Nurses and doctors moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking to watch. Trays clattered, doors swung open. The low hum of the department escalated into a symphony of controlled urgency. This was her orchestra, and she was the conductor. Anya strode toward the main ambulance bay doors, her tablet now a tool of command. She was no longer Nurse Sharma, the chastised manager. She was the operational commander of this small, frantic battlefield. "Get me Dr. Evans, now," she ordered a junior nurse. "Tell him I have a probable exsanguination inbound, and get the OR prepped for an emergency thoracotomy. I want them ready to wheel him straight from my bay to the table." "We don't know the patient's condition yet," the young nurse stammered, wide-eyed. "Multiple GSW and blast trauma from a chopper evac?" Anya didn't even look at her. "He's bleeding out. He just doesn't know it yet. Get the OR ready." The nurse scurried away, galvanized by the sheer certainty in Anya's voice. The wail of the helicopter grew from a distant thrum to a deafening roar that vibrated through the concrete foundations of the hospital itself. The air outside the bay doors swirled with dust and debris kicked up by the rotor wash. Then, silence. The engines whined down. The doors burst open. It was a wave of motion. Two paramedics, faces grim, manhandled a gurney that seemed too small for the chaos upon it. The patient was a man, large-framed, covered in a thermal blanket, but blood had soaked through it in great, dark patches. Tubes and wires snaked from his body, connected to a portable monitor that was screaming a frantic, high-pitched alarm. But it was the men surrounding the gurney who changed the context of the entire scene. They were not paramedics or police. They were four men in dark, severe suits, their faces hard, their eyes scanning everything, missing nothing. One of them had an earpiece, his lips moving silently. Another man, in a crisp military uniform, his rank denoted by the silver eagle on his collar, walked alongside the gurney, his hand resting on it, as if through sheer will he could keep the man on it alive. His face was granite. Alistair Finch reappeared, drawn by the commotion and the obvious importance of the arrival. He rushed forward, his smarmy, reassuring CEO face back in place. "I'm Alistair Finch, CEO of St. Jude's. You have my word. Your man will get the best care in the city." The man in the uniform, a colonel, didn't even glance at him. His eyes were locked on the trauma bay, on the team assembling, on Anya. His expression was a mask of cold, brutal assessment. He was judging them, and he was not impressed. "Just keep him alive," the colonel said, his voice clipped and raw. They crashed the gurney into Trauma Bay 1. The controlled chaos intensified. "Report!" Anya's voice was sharp. "John Doe, approximately 50 years old," a paramedic rattled off. 3 apparent GSWs to the chest and abdomen, shrapnel wounds to the left leg and arm. BP is 70 over palpation and dropping. Heart rate 140. We've pushed 2 liters of saline, but we can't keep the pressure up." "He's not a John Doe," the colonel bit out, standing just inside the bay, a sentinel of grim authority. Anya ignored him. She ignored Finch, who was hovering uselessly in the doorway, trying to look concerned and in charge. She pushed past a resident and put her own hands on the patient. Her fingers went to his neck, searching for the carotid pulse. It was thready, a frightened bird fluttering against her fingertips. She ripped open the blood-soaked shirt. The sight was horrific. The entry wounds were dark, angry holes, but it was the bruising, a deep, mottled purple spreading across the entire upper chest, that made her breath catch. Dr. Evans, the head of trauma surgery, was there now, shouting orders. "Get me a chest tube tray. He's got a massive hemothorax. We need to drain that chest cavity." Anya's eyes were still on the bruising. The pattern was wrong. The distended veins in the man's neck, the tracheal deviation that was so subtle everyone else had missed it. It wasn't just blood filling his chest. It was air. A tension pneumothorax, but a particularly nasty high-pressure one, likely from a concussive blast wave tearing the lung tissue. The chest tube would help, but it wouldn't be fast enough. The pressure was already crushing his heart. It was a cardiac tamponade, induced by air pressure. The monitor shrieked a continuous, flat tone. "He's in VFib! We're losing him!" a nurse shouted. "Charging the paddles!" "No!" Anya's voice cut through the panic. "Paddles won't work. His heart is being strangled. We have to release the pressure." "The chest tube is coming," Evans insisted, his face slick with sweat. "No time," Anya said, her mind a cold, clear machine of calculation. There was a procedure, a brutally effective but dangerous field technique for exactly this kind of injury. A needle decompression. But if she was wrong, she could puncture the heart or a major artery. It was a massive risk, a career-ending one. Finch stepped forward. "Let the doctor handle this, nurse. You are out of your depth." Anya didn't hear him. She looked from the dying man on the table to the granite-faced colonel watching her, his eyes narrowed, judging. She had to communicate the nature of the problem, the certainty of her diagnosis, to the only other person in the room who might understand the context of such an injury. She needed him to trust her. She leaned over the patient, her hand on his shoulder, as if comforting him. Her voice was low, calm, almost a whisper, meant only for him and for the colonel standing a few feet away. "Condition Archangel," she said, her voice clear and precise. "Execute Nightingale Protocol." The words were meaningless to anyone else in the room. Jargon, nonsense. But to the colonel, they were a lightning strike. His head, which had been tracking Dr. Evans, snapped toward Anya. His jaw went slack for a fraction of a second. His eyes, previously cold and assessing, widened in stunned, absolute disbelief. He stared at her, not as a nurse in pale blue scrubs, but as if he were seeing a ghost. Nightingale Protocol, a classified, last-ditch medical directive developed for Tier 1 operators after a disastrous mission in the 90s. It was a sequence of high-risk, high-reward field procedures for blast trauma, known only to a handful of special operations medics and the surgeons who trained them. It was not something a civilian nurse in a downtown hospital should know. Finch, oblivious, saw only insubordination. "Nurse Sharma, I am ordering you to step aside. Security!" Before anyone could move, the colonel stepped forward, his body a solid wall of authority. He moved with the quiet, deadly grace of a man who had spent his life in harm's way. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice cut through the room like a shard of ice. "Do what she says." Dr. Evans froze, chest tube kit in his hand, looking from the furious CEO to the impossibly commanding military officer. "But the standard procedure is—" The colonel's gaze fell upon him, and it was withering. "That was an order. Do it. Now." All debate ceased. The authority in the room had shifted, decisively and irrevocably. Alistair Finch stood with his mouth open, his command of the situation utterly broken. Anya was already moving. "Give me a 14-gauge needle and a long catheter," she commanded. A nurse slapped it into her hand without hesitation. "I need to go in high, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line," Anya said, as much to herself as to the stunned medical team around her. Her fingers found the spot on the man's chest with an unnerving certainty. She was not guessing. She had done this before. Not here in a brightly lit, sterile bay, but in the dark, with sand and blood and the screams of men in her ears. "This is against every protocol," Evans whispered, horrified. "His protocol is different," Anya said, her eyes fixed on her target. She didn't look at the colonel, but she knew he was watching, understanding. She pushed the needle in. It was a controlled, powerful movement. There was a soft pop as it punctured the pleura, and then a sound. A sudden, violent hiss, like air escaping from a slashed tire. It was the sound of the man's life returning. The immense pressure inside his chest cavity vented out through the catheter. On the monitor, the flatline alarm stopped. A single weak beep appeared, then another, and another. A ragged but present sinus rhythm. The collective exhale in the room was a physical wave. "Blood pressure is coming up," a nurse called out, her voice trembling with awe. 80/50, heart rate stabilizing at 120. Anya secured the catheter with practiced efficiency, then stepped back, her part of the drama over. "He's stable for now," she said to Dr. Evans, her voice once again quiet and professional. "But he's still bleeding internally. He needs that OR." Dr. Evans just stared at her, then at the hissing catheter, then back at her. He nodded, speechless, and began shouting new orders to get the patient moving. The team, now with a renewed sense of purpose, wheeled the gurney out of the bay and sprinted toward the elevators that led to the surgical floor. As the chaos receded, an unnerving quiet fell over the trauma bay. All that remained was Anya, the colonel, and a sputtering, incandescently furious Alistair Finch. Finch found his voice first. It was shaking with rage. "What in God's name was that? You defied a direct order. You performed a procedure you are not qualified for. You endangered that patient. You are finished, Sharma. Your career is over." The colonel turned his head slowly to look at Finch. The movement was deliberate, chilling. The temperature in the room, which had been fever-hot with adrenaline, seemed to plummet. "That woman," the colonel said, his voice dangerously soft, "just saved the life of General Marcus Wallace, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Finch's face went white. The color drained from his skin as if a plug had been pulled. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the highest-ranking military officer in the entire United States Armed Forces. The colonel took a step toward Finch, invading his personal space. Finch, for all his tailored suit authority, instinctively shrank back. "From this moment on," the colonel continued, his voice a low growl, "she is in charge of the general's care. You will give her anything she requires. You will grant her any request. You will provide any personnel she asks for. And you, personally, will stay the hell out of her way. Is that understood?" It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of a new reality. Finch could only nod, his jaw working silently. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. He had been rendered utterly powerless in his own hospital. He shot Anya a look of venomous hatred, a promise of future retribution, before turning on his heel and stalking away, his dignity in tatters. Anya leaned against the cool metal of a supply cabinet, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its wake. Her hands had a faint tremor. She pressed them together, willing them to be still. The colonel watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. The hard, granite lines of his face seemed to soften slightly. "You need a minute," he stated. She gave a weak nod. "Just a minute." He followed her as she walked numbly out of the trauma bay and into a small, empty corridor, away from the prying eyes of the ER staff, who were now staring at her with a mixture of awe and terror. She braced herself against a concrete pillar, the rough, cool texture a welcome anchor in a world that had just been tilted on its axis. She closed her eyes. "Colonel," she started, but her voice trailed off. "Thorne," he supplied. "Colonel Marcus Thorne, the General's senior aide." He stood a respectful distance away, not crowding her, but his presence was a solid, reassuring weight. "You did well in there." "I broke about 6 different hospital regulations and assaulted a patient with a very large needle," she said, her voice flat. A ghost of a dry, sardonic smile touched her lips. "I'm not sure 'well' is the word the board is going to use." "It's the only word that matters," he countered. He was silent for a moment, studying her. "I have to ask, where did you serve?" Anya opened her eyes. The question she had spent the last decade of her life avoiding. She had built a new identity, a quiet life, brick by painful brick. Nurse Anya Sharma, not the person she used to be. "That was a long time ago," she said evasively, her gaze dropping to the scuffed toes of her comfortable nursing shoes. Thorne didn't push. He didn't need to. "Nightingale Protocol," he said, his voice low and resonant in the quiet hallway. "It was developed by a JSOC surgical team after the Battle of Mogadishu, a response to the unique trauma profiles of high-velocity rounds and explosive ordnance in close quarters. It was never formally published. It's taught to pararescue jumpers, Delta medics, And a few other specialists. There are maybe 50 people alive who know it. Most of them are ghosts. He was revealing her past for her, piece by piece, holding up a mirror to a face she no longer recognized as her own. She finally looked at him, her carefully constructed civilian facade crumbling. "I was a consultant," she said, the official, sterile euphemism for the work she had done. A lie that was almost the truth. Thorne's eyes held hers. He knew the euphemism. He knew what it meant. "What was your call sign?" he asked softly. The name felt alien on her tongue, a relic from another lifetime, another self. "Hera," she whispered. A flicker of recognition, of profound respect, crossed Thorne's face. He nodded slowly. "Hera. I've heard the stories. I didn't know you were a woman." He paused. "I definitely didn't know you were a nurse in Baltimore." "I wanted a quiet life," she said, a raw, honest truth. "Turns out I'm not very good at it." Thorne's gaze sharpened again, the brief moment of personal connection receding as the military professional took over. "That man, Finch, he has a problem with your authority." Anya gave a tired, humorless shrug. "He's concerned with budgets. I'm concerned with patience." She let out a dry, weary sigh. "He finds my priorities fiscally irresponsible. Today, he informed me I was replaceable." Thorne's jaw tightened. He looked past her, down the hall in the direction Finch had fled. A look of cold, calculating anger settled in his eyes. He saw the bigger picture instantly. A hospital is a logistical machine. A compromised, corrupt, or incompetent leader makes that machine a liability. And right now, the most valuable patient in the world was inside that machine. "A man willing to sacrifice patient care for profit margins is a man who cuts corners elsewhere," Thorne said, thinking aloud. "Security, supplies, personnel screening." He looked back at Anya, his decision made. "The general will be here for weeks, maybe months. This hospital is now a national security asset. Its leadership needs to be unimpeachable." He pulled out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. "I need to make a call." Anya just nodded, too exhausted to process the full implications of his words. She watched as he walked a few paces down the hall and began to speak in low, clipped tones. He was reporting, but he was also giving an order. He was setting something in motion, something vast and unstoppable. And Anya Sharma, the replaceable nurse, was standing at the epicenter of it all. While Colonel Thorne was on the phone, setting the gears of a vast, unseen machine into motion, Alistair Finch was in his penthouse office, waging a war of his own. The panoramic view of the city, usually a source of immense pride, did nothing to soothe the furious, acidic knot in his stomach. He had been humiliated, undermined, made to look like a fool in his own kingdom. And it was all her fault. The nurse. Sharma. He paced his office, the plush carpet silencing his agitated steps. He couldn't fire her. Not now. Not with a 4-star general in his ICU and a stone-faced colonel acting as her personal bulldog. It would be a PR nightmare. The media would have a field day. Hero nurse fired by greedy CEO after saving top general. No, a direct assault was too risky. But Finch had not gotten to his position through direct assaults. He was a creature of shadows and whispers, of carefully documented infractions and anonymous complaints. He jabbed the intercom on his desk. "Get me Carol from HR, and pull Anya Sharma's complete personnel file. I want everything. Performance reviews, commendations, reprimands, attendance records, everything." He would build a case. A slow, meticulous, undeniable case. Insubordination. That was the core of it. But he needed more. He would paint her as a reckless, loose cannon, a danger to the hospital. The unauthorized procedure was a gift. He would get statements. He would twist her record until it looked like a litany of failures and near misses, and her heroic act would seem like a desperate gamble that just happened to pay off. When Carol from HR, a woman whose loyalty was bought and paid for by Finch's patronage, arrived with the file, he devoured it. It was annoyingly pristine. Years of exemplary reviews, commendations from patients, letters of praise from junior doctors she had mentored. Not a single official reprimand. "This is too clean," Finch muttered, tossing the file on his desk in disgust. "No one is this perfect." "She's very by the book," Carol offered timidly. "Except when she isn't, I guess." "Exactly," Finch seized on the word. "Find out when she isn't. Talk to her staff, quietly. I want to know every time she's bent a rule, every time she's bucked the chain of command. Offer incentives for cooperation, shift preferences, bonuses. People will talk if you give them a reason." He thought he was planting seeds in fertile ground. He assumed the nurses in the ER were like any other employees, resentful, ambitious, and ultimately self-interested. He could not have been more wrong. Down in the emergency department, a strange and powerful phenomenon was taking place, an underground railroad of courage. Carol from HR, with her clip-on smile and veiled questions, made her rounds. She cornered a young nurse named Maria in the linen closet. "I'm just trying to get a complete picture of the incident with General Wallace," Carol began sweetly. "Anya's actions were quite unorthodox. Have you ever seen her take such liberties before?" Maria, who had been on the verge of quitting a month ago before Anya had personally intervened to reschedule her shifts so she could care for her sick mother, looked at Carol with cold eyes. "What I saw was Nurse Sharma save a man's life when the head of trauma surgery was frozen. She was the calmest person in the room. She was a hero." Carol tried a different nurse, an older veteran named David, catching him by the coffee machine. "Alistair is concerned that Anya's management style might be creating a high-stress environment. Has she ever asked you to do something you felt was against protocol?" David took a slow sip of his stale coffee. He remembered the time his son was in a car accident, and Anya had covered his shift for 12 hours straight, no questions asked, after she had already worked a full day. Anya Sharma creates the only environment where we can actually do our jobs. She protects us from the budget cuts and the bureaucracy so we can focus on the patients. The only stress around here comes from the top floor. He stared pointedly at Carol until she scurried away. It was the same everywhere she went, a wall of silence and loyalty. The staff closed ranks around their leader. They had seen her stand up to Finch for them 100 times in budget meetings. They had seen her fight for better equipment, for safer staffing ratios, for their well-being. And they had just seen her publicly humiliated and then vindicated in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. They weren't just her employees. They were her soldiers. And they would not betray their commander. Finch grew more and more frustrated. His spies came back with nothing but praise for the woman he was trying to destroy. It was maddening. It was illogical. It only deepened his resolve to remove her. She had to have a secret, a weakness. If you were Anya, knowing Finch was coming for you, but having the silent backing of a powerful colonel, would you lay low and trust the process? Or would you prepare for a fight on your own terms? Anya, for her part, was not laying low. She was working. The general's recovery was her sole focus. She coordinated with the surgical team, the ICU staff, and the security detail Thorne had installed, which now consisted of 4 discreet but very large men in suits who seemed to materialize in doorways whenever a stranger approached the ICU wing. She was in her element. The logistics were complex, the stakes stratospheric, but it was just a puzzle to be solved, a mission. She moved through the hospital with a quiet, renewed authority. The staff looked at her differently now. The awe had replaced the pity. They followed her orders with a speed and efficiency that bordered on military precision. They knew she was fighting for them, and now they saw she had powerful allies. 2 days after the incident, Finch decided he could wait no longer. He had found something, a tiny thread, but he was determined to pull it. On her initial application to the hospital, years ago, under the section for previous employment, Anya had listed a 5-year gap. It was labeled simply as private contractor overseas. It had been overlooked at the time, her nursing credentials and references being impeccable. But now, to Finch, it looked like a lie, a cover-up. He would use it. He would use it to paint her as deceptive, a person with a hidden, unverifiable past, a security risk. It was thin, but combined with the reckless procedure, he thought he could make it stick. He summoned her to his office. The call came late in the afternoon. Anya was finishing a long shift, the exhaustion of familiar weight on her shoulders. She knew this was coming. "Mr. Finch wants to see you," his secretary's voice said over the phone. "Now." Anya took a moment. She went to the locker room and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, but the eyes themselves were clear. They were calm. She was no longer the isolated, humiliated woman from 2 days ago. She was Hera, and she was walking into the enemy's command post. The walk to the CEO's office was long, a journey from the gritty reality of the hospital's ground floor to the rarefied air of the executive suite. The carpet grew plusher with every floor the elevator climbed. The art on the walls became more expensive. The air itself seemed thinner, cleaner. Finch's office was designed to intimidate. It was vast, almost an entire corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city. He was not standing to greet her. He was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, a small dark file placed precisely in the center of the polished surface. He gestured to the chair opposite him without looking up. Anya sat. The chair was low, designed to make the visitor feel small. She sat upright, her back not touching the supple leather. She waited. Silence was a weapon, and she was comfortable with it. Finally, Finch looked up. His smile was back, but it was different now. It was not the condescending smile of a superior. It was the chilling, triumphant smile of a predator that has its prey cornered. "Thank you for coming, Miss Sharma," he began, the use of her last name a deliberate distancing. "I've been doing some reviewing of your performance, of your history with this hospital." He tapped the file with a manicured finger. "It's been brought to my attention that your actions in the ER 2 days ago, while fortunate in their outcome, constituted a flagrant and dangerous breach of hospital protocol. You defied the orders of a senior physician. You performed a specialized surgical procedure for which you hold no certification. By all rights, I should have had you arrested." Anya remained silent, her expression neutral. She let him talk. She knew he had rehearsed this. "But I am a reasonable man," he continued, leaning back in his chair, savoring the moment. "I believe in second chances. However, in doing my due diligence, I uncovered some discrepancies in your employment history." He opened the file. A 5-year gap. Private contractor, overseas. It's rather vague, wouldn't you say? For a position in a high-security environment like a hospital, it's an oversight that you were ever hired with such a hole in your record. A serious oversight. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping. "I have a hospital to run. I cannot have liabilities. I cannot have employees who are not who they say they are. A reckless nurse with a mysterious, undocumented past? The board would be appalled. The press would be fascinated." This was the thread. the kill shot he had been preparing. "So, we have a problem," he said, steepling his fingers. "But I, as a reasonable man, have a solution. For you, and for me. You will sign a letter of resignation, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. In return for your quiet departure, I will not report you to the state nursing board for your actions. Your file will be sealed. You can go and be a nurse somewhere else. A small clinic, perhaps. Out of the city." He slid a single piece of paper and a heavy, expensive-looking pen across the desk. Her pre-written resignation letter. "You have 1 hour to sign it. After that, the offer is withdrawn, and I will be forced to pursue all official channels. Your career in medicine will be over." He smiled. It was done. He had won. Anya looked at the letter. She looked at the pen. Then she looked up, meeting his eyes across the vast expanse of the mahogany desk. She did not look afraid. She did not look intimidated. She looked calm. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent office with the force of a grenade. Finch's smile vanished. "I don't think you understand the position you're in." "No, mister." "Finch," Anya replied, her voice still even but now edged with something hard as diamond. "I don't think you do." At that exact moment, the heavy wooden door to the office swung open. Finch shot to his feet, his face contorting with fury. "I am in a private meeting. Whoever you are, get out!" Colonel Thorne stepped into the room. He was not in uniform today, but in a perfectly tailored gray suit that made him look less like a soldier and more like a high-level government official, which, Anya suspected, was a role he also played. He was not alone. Flanking him were 2 other individuals, a man and a woman, in severe, dark business attire. They had the quiet, watchful intensity of federal agents. Their eyes swept the room, cataloging everything, their expressions grim and unreadable. Thorne did not look at Anya. His gaze was fixed entirely on Alistair Finch. "Mr. Finch," Thorne said, his voice calm and utterly devoid of warmth. "My name is Colonel Thorne." These are Special Agents Davies and Monroe from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. Finch's blustering rage faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. "The Department of Defense? I don't understand. What is this about?" "We have some questions for you," Thorne said, taking another step into the room. The agents fanned out, one moving discreetly toward the office door, the other remaining near Thorne. The trap was sprung. "Questions regarding your hospital's supply chain and certain billing irregularities related to federal insurance programs." Finch's face, which had been flushed with anger, began to pale. "My supply chain? That's absurd. Our books are impeccable." "Are they?" Agent Davies, the woman, spoke for the first time. Her voice was flat, professional, and utterly chilling. She held up a thin tablet. "Because we've been conducting a full-spectrum audit for the past 48 hours. An audit initiated at the request of the Joint Chiefs of Staff due to concerns about the security and operational integrity of this facility." She tapped the screen. "We found some interesting things. For example, a company called Med Supply Solutions, LLC. They are the sole provider of a number of items for this hospital: syringes, catheters, surgical steel, even the beds in your ICU. They charge, on average, 300% above market rate." Finch's composure began to crack. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. "We prioritize quality. Our suppliers are vetted for—" "Med Supply Solutions is a shell corporation," Agent Monroe, the man, cut in, his voice a low baritone. "Registered to a post office box in Delaware. Its sole board member and owner is a holding company, Finch Holdings Group." He looked up from his own device. which in turn is owned by you and your wife. The air left the room. Anya watched, silent, as the structure of Alistair Finch's world dissolved around him. It was happening faster than she could have imagined. This wasn't just an investigation. It was a verdict. You've been billing the government, through Medicare and TRICARE, millions of dollars for wildly inflated equipment costs, Davies continued, her voice relentless. Equipment you are purchasing for yourself, from yourself. You've been systematically defrauding the U.S. government for at least 6 years. This is a mistake, Finch stammered, sinking back into his chair. He looked smaller now, the expensive suit hanging off him like a costume. The power had drained from him, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man. And the budget cuts, Thorne added, his voice laced with contempt. The understaffing in the ER, the refusal to purchase new diagnostic machines. It wasn't about efficiency, was it, Mr. Finch? It was to maximize your profit margin. You were deliberately endangering patients, forcing your staff to work in impossible conditions with failing equipment, just so you could skim more off the top. The pieces clicked into place for Anya with sickening clarity. The overtime Finch had berated her for. It wasn't a sign of her failure as a manager. It was a direct consequence of his greed. She and her team had been making miracles happen every day, not just in spite of the budget cuts, but because of the active sabotage of their own CEO. Her competence hadn't just been an inconvenience to him, it had been a direct threat to his criminal enterprise. We have the bank records, Davies said. Offshore accounts, the transfer orders, we have emails, we have everything. Finch stared at them, his face a rictus of disbelief and terror. The arrogant mask had completely shattered. He looked from the agents to Thorne, and then, finally, his eyes landed on Anya. And in them, she saw a flicker of horrified understanding. He finally realized that his public attempt to humiliate her, to brand her as replaceable, had been the catalyst for his own destruction. By trying to swat a fly, he had brought the entire weight of the United States military and federal government down on his head. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The fight was gone. Alistair Finch, Agent Davies said formally, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States, wire fraud, and money laundering. Agent Monroe stepped forward, produced a pair of handcuffs, and recited the Miranda rights in a calm, practiced monotone. Finch didn't seem to hear him. He just stared into the middle distance, a man watching his life burn to the ground. They pulled him to his feet. As they escorted him toward the door, he passed by Anya's chair. He stopped, his face a twisted mask of hatred. You, he hissed, the word full of venom. You did this. Anya looked at him. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel joy. She just felt a profound, quiet sense of finality. The end of a long, ugly chapter. No, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice soft. You did. They led him out of the office. The door clicked shut, leaving Anya alone with Colonel Thorne in the silent, opulent tomb of Finch's ambition. The news of Alistair Finch's arrest swept through St. Jude's General like a shockwave. It traveled through text messages, hushed conversations in hallways, and stunned gatherings at nurses' stations. The atmosphere in the hospital was one of chaos, but it was a cleansing chaos, a fever that was finally breaking. The board of directors was in an emergency session that lasted through the night. Lawyers and accountants swarmed the executive suites. Anya felt strangely detached from it all. She went back to work. There was still a hospital to run, patients to care for. She checked on General Wallace, who was now awake, lucid, and steadily recovering in the ICU. The security detail outside his room nodded to her with a new level of respect as she entered. The general, A man whose face was known to the world, looked older and more fragile lying in the hospital bed. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of gratitude. "Nurse Sharma," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Colonel Thorne told me everything. What you did in the ER. What you knew." "I'm just glad you're recovering, sir," Anya said simply. "There are two kinds of courage," the general said, his gaze unwavering. "The kind that lets you run into a fight, and the kind that lets you stand your ground when you're told to back down. It seems you have a surplus of both." He paused, his expression serious. "Thorne also told me about your previous service, your call sign. The country owes you a debt twice over. If there is ever anything you need, you have my number." It was a promise of immense weight, delivered without fanfare. It was validation from one of the highest echelons of power. But what Anya felt most was a quiet sense of peace. The past she had tried to bury was no longer a source of shame or secrecy, but one of honor. Later that day, Colonel Thorne found her on the small, windswept rooftop garden the hospital kept for staff. It was her sanctuary, a place to find 5 minutes of quiet amid the relentless demands of the ER. "He's gone," Thorne said, standing beside her as she looked out over the city. "The board accepted his resignation in absentia. The U.S. Attorney's Office is taking the case. He'll likely be in prison for a very long time." "Good," Anya said. The word was simple, but it carried the weight of years of frustration and quiet struggle. "The board is in a panic," Thorne continued. "The hospital's reputation is in jeopardy. Their accreditation could be at risk. They need a new leader, an interim CEO, to stop the bleeding, restore confidence, and right the ship." Anya nodded, not particularly interested. It was a problem for men in suits, not for her. "They spent all night debating candidates," Thorne said. "Heads of other hospitals, retired executives. Then, this morning, they received a call from the Secretary of Defense." Anya turned to look at him, a flicker of interest in her eyes. The secretary, on behalf of the White House and the Department of Defense, made a recommendation, a strong one. They feel that, given the circumstances, the new leader of St. Jude's needs to be someone with unimpeachable integrity. Someone who understands the hospital's operations from the ground up, not the top down. Someone who has the unconditional trust of the staff and the gratitude of the United States government. He met her gaze, his expression serious, but with a hint of a smile in his eyes. "They asked for you, Anya." Anya stared at him, stunned into silence. She thought it was a joke, a mistake. "Me?" she finally managed to say. "Colonel, I'm a nurse." "You're a leader," he corrected her gently, but firmly. "You've led teams in situations that would make Alistair Finch curl up and die in a corner. You ran the most critical department in this hospital on a shoestring budget while your own CEO was actively trying to make you fail. For God's sake, your call sign was Hera. You were named after the Queen of the Gods. Stop thinking of yourself as just a nurse." He took a step closer. "This isn't a promotion, Anya. It's a battlefield commission. It's a correction. The board has already voted. It was unanimous. They're drafting the offer now." She was speechless. The idea was absurd, impossible. Her, in Finch's office, making decisions about budgets and bylaws and the future of the entire hospital? The weight of it was terrifying. But then she thought of her staff. She thought of Maria and David and all the others who had stood by her. She thought of the patients who depended on them. And she thought of Alistair Finch and the corrupt, soul-crushing system he had built. She could fix it. From the inside. She could give her people the resources they needed. She could make St. Jude's a place that put patients first, not just in its marketing brochures, but in its very soul. A slow, determined nod was her only answer. An hour later, she walked into Alistair Finch's former office. The board members who had flanked him just days ago now stood to greet her, their faces a mixture of apprehension and forced respect. They offered her the position of interim chief executive officer. She accepted. After they left, she stood alone in the vast, silent room. The ridiculously large mahogany desk, the low, intimidating visitors' chairs, the panoramic view of a city she had sworn to serve. She walked to the window, but she didn't look out at the impressive skyline, at the symbols of power and wealth. She looked down at the street level, at the curved driveway of the emergency department entrance. She watched as an ambulance, lights flashing, pulled up to the doors she knew so well. She watched the paramedics and her nurses rush out to meet it. That was her city. That was her world. She walked over to the CEO's chair, the throne of a fallen king. She ran her hand over the cool, expensive leather. Then she sat down. The chair was too big, too soft. It felt wrong. But as she sat there, a quiet, exhausted relief washed over her. The humiliation, the fear, the desperation, it was all gone. The battle was over. The real work was just beginning. Thank you for watching. If you want to keep these stories alive, the #1 thing you can do is subscribe to the channel. It tells us you want more. Now, we have a question for you. Anya's story is one of hidden strength. Have you ever been underestimated in your own life, only to surprise everyone, including yourself? Let us know in the comments below. Your next story is loaded and waiting for you on the screen. We'll see you there.